Hi, it's Dr. T. And in this week's episode, we're answering the question, why is the divorce rate so high in the US? Well, historically, we have had pretty low divorce rates in this country, even up into the early 1900s. And they actually fell during the Great Depression because a lot of men just deserted their families. They were too humiliated and ashamed that they couldn't support them, and so they would just leave, or there wasn't money for a divorce, and so they would just separate. And the divorce rate stayed pretty low, spiked a bit after World War II. A lot of people got married real quick, kind of hasty weddings before people got shipped off. And then when they got back together after the war, realized, I don't know this person, I made a mistake. And so there was kind of this spike, came back down. But then there was a steady climb from the 60s into the early 80s. And believe it or not, we have been pretty steady since that time, since the early 80s. So this idea that the divorce rate just keeps climbing and climbing is not true. Now, what's really happening with divorces? A lot of times you hear the statistic, oh, half of marriages end in divorce, or more than half of marriages end in divorce. That's an exaggeration. For first marriages, it's about 42%. So it's still pretty high, but it's not 50%. It is higher for subsequent marriages, though. Second, third marriages, divorce rate is above 50%. Trends in divorce, most of them occur within the first few years. 7 years is about the median time frame for divorce. Most people have no children when they divorce. But it is true that there are some people who get divorced much later in life. They could be married 30, 40, even more than that. And a lot of us might have a tendency to say, my gosh, you've been together all this time. Why? Why would you divorce now? Well, the truth is we're living longer. And if you maybe stayed together because of the kids, just were together because you didn't know what else to do, and then later in life decide you're really unhappy, you want to do something about it. You say, I've only got so many years left. I want to be really happy, and I'm just not happy in this marriage. So it isn't unheard of for people who've been married many, many years to get divorced. So why? Why do we have this higher divorce rate? Well, one of the reasons is that we actually have seen our view of marriage change dramatically in the last 100 years. Whereas marriage was more of like this sort of contract, we get together and we need each other to do certain things, certain kinds of jobs. I'm going to work the farm. You're going to prepare all the food and raise the children, that sort of thing. And we're just going to be a team and we'll live out our lives together. In the early 1900s, there started to be this rise of this idea of what we call the companionate marriage, where spouses should be best friends and they should do things together and enjoy each other's company. That wasn't really an expectation prior to that time. And so we actually expect more of marriage. And so the divorce rate is at least in part a reflection of that. And many people who get divorced try again. And so researchers will point to these two dynamics and say, divorce is not an indication that we give up on the institute of marriage. It's this idea, the indication that we hold it to a high standard. We expect a lot out of our relationships. And so if we're not getting it, we want to be free to try again with someone else. We're not willing to settle. So I said that in the middle of the 20th century, the 60s, that the divorce rate kind of really took off. And why did that happen? Well, that coincides with another dramatic shift in social life. And that was a change in our economy where we lost a lot of the good jobs, especially in manufacturing, that allowed one person, the husband, the man, usually, to earn enough money to support a family, that paid a living wage. At this same time frame, you've got the women's liberation movement saying women should get an education, they should get a job, they should have their own money. And then with the loss of these jobs that paid a living wage, women's money, women's earnings were needed to keep two-parent families afloat. And so that's a dramatic shift in that contract of, I'm going to earn the money, you're going to stay home and take care of the kids or be centered in the domestic realm. That's a major change. So you go from having two big jobs and two people to cover them to now you've got three jobs. His paid job, her paid job, and the job of taking care of the home and family. 3 jobs, and still only 2 people to cover them. And what has really happened, and I don't want to be accused of male bashing here, but men have not stepped up to that challenge. Women have been trying to do it all. And for more than 30 years that I was in the classroom teaching this, I would say, things have not really changed that much. This idea that, housework is women's work and women are the primary caregivers. They're the better parents for young children, and men do things like the lawn and repairs and that sort of stuff. Like, those ideas have not changed as much as you think they have. And my students would roll their eyes at me. And now I see all across social media women in their 20s, 30s, and 40s going, oh my God, the load I carry is absolutely insane. And it is. They're right. And it's been happening for more than 50 years. It's been happening since this big shift in the 60s and 70s. So the division of labor at home, the kinds of things that men and women do, have been very different traditionally. Men have done, as I said, things like outside jobs, the lawn, snow, raking leaves, doing repairs, those kinds of things. Women have done cooking, cleaning, laundry, taking care of children. There's a tremendous difference in the load with those two sets of jobs. The kinds of things that men do have some discretion and timing typically. Like, if you don't mow the lawn today, the world's not going to come to an end. But if you have young children, they do have to be fed. They do need clothes to wear. They do need diapers changed if they are of that age. So women do things that need to happen more often, 3 meals a day. God knows how many diaper changes a day, right? Those tend to be things done by women. Still, in many, many households, and they have to be done repetitively. There's time pressure associated with them. Now, there's a lot of shifting and moving across those lines. I know there was in my own household with my husband. There was even a little bit for my parents when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s. But those ideas have not equalized the way we would hope they have. The other thing that's really important to recognize, and this is something, again, doesn't seem to get enough attention until you are the person stuck doing it, and that is what we call the invisible labor of a home. This is the work that nobody notices unless you don't do it. So you can talk about cooking and cleaning and laundry and all those things, but there are a million other things, seemingly, that have to be done to keep a household running. And this was pointed out very, very forcefully when I was doing my own research. I sent out a questionnaire to couples about how they organized their household and how they took care of all these chores. And it's hard to list every single thing a household needs. So I just listed sort of the basic things. And one woman on the back of her questionnaire wrote, "You are missing a whole lot on this questionnaire," which I was well aware of. She said, "You do not highlight all the work that has to be done that nobody recognizes." She didn't use the term invisible labor, but she had that idea in her head. She said, "You don't ask who recognizes that last year's snow boots are not going to fit before the first snow this year. You don't highlight who makes sure that there's change for lunch money every day. You don't highlight who does all the carpooling and organizes the daycare and the backup daycare and the sick daycare and all the other things, all the things that it takes. Who makes all the doctor's appointments? The execution of these tasks is a cakewalk in comparison to having to organize all of the planning for all of these things. It is constant, continual planning. You can never stop thinking about it. That's invisible labor. And so I see a lot of women say, "Well, my husband says, I'll do anything you want me to do. Just tell me." And they say, "Why do I have to tell you?" That's the disconnect there. Because it's your house. You're not recognizing it. You're not stepping up. You're not taking ownership of it. I have to remember that it has to be done. And then I have to tell you that it has to be done. And maybe I even have to do some things to make it easier for you to do it so I can get it off my plate. But it's all on my plate as the woman until I tell you to do it. So even that is labor for her. So what the research shows is that when you look at the household work as a whole, in many circumstances, men add to the workload. They don't take away. They're not being helpful. They're not carrying their share of the burden. As women have moved into earning wages alongside their husbands, men have not stepped up in the same way in taking on the load at home. And eventually, women get to the point where they can't take it anymore. Many women do. Most divorces are initiated by women, and they most often cite breakdown in communication or irreconcilable differences. And the underlying issue for those is the workload at home. They're sick of doing it. They're sick of continually asking. You see it? You see it's dirty? Why can't you just do it? Why do I have to ask you to do it? And the mental load, all of it just gets to be too much. And they figure they're better off just being on their own. Now, the part of the problem is, of course, the world around us, that the world of work does not give in any way an opportunity for people to blend their work and family life. The workplace demands are very rigid. They act like everybody has a wife at home to take care of the house and kids. So families have had to be the shock absorbers for this dramatic shift. It is a huge shift. We take it for granted now, but this is a huge historical shift of women moving into the workplace. The majority of women being in the paid workforce. And the workforce, the world of paid work, has not accommodated that. You can look at earlier episodes on globalization and why families are hurting economically to hear a little bit more about this. But it is no wonder that so many people are unhappy when there is this disjuncture between what families need and what workplaces allow, and then the workload of taking care of a family, and that culturally that still falls to women. Even if men are doing some of the chores, women are still carrying a tremendous load because they're still doing all of that planning.